I'm here with one of our goats, Julia Alvarez. My name is Alvarez Castillo. I'm a book reviewer for the Dominican Writers Association, and I'm so honored to be in conversation with you, Julia, about your beautiful forthcoming novel, The Cemetery of Untold Stories. I have my ARC here, and I have it marked up and highlighted, and I just want you to know that I absolutely loved this novel. It was
Thank
unlike
you.
You're welcome. It was unlike anything I've ever read. And I wanted to ask you, you know, my first question for you is, you beautifully weave in bits of Dominican history and magical realism and real life questions that many writers face, one of which is whose stories get to be told. So my first question is, and I know you've been asked this many times over the years, what inspired this novel?
Well, actually, since it's not yet born, it's officially going to be born April 2nd. Not that many people have asked me yet about this novel. So you're one of the first. What inspired it? Well, I think one of the things is that as I enter this new landscape of growing old, I'm really curious about what that experience is about, and especially growing old in a craft as a writer, storyteller that I've been practicing all my life. So it's a novel that comes out of those concerns and meditations and thinkings and questions about what happens at this stage of life and at this stage in the craft. So that's initially what inspired it. And to bring it even more personal, it was during the pandemic. I had started to work on this story of this older writer. I didn't yet know where it was going. And then I suffered a huge crisis for a writer. I lost vision in one eye. I had two major surgeries. I couldn't see. The other eye was maybe going to go in the same direction. I have to watch it for the rest of my life. But I thought, oh my gosh, what if I can't write anymore? What do I do with all the characters that I've still sort of promised them? I'm going to put them down on paper. What happens to the ones that are in boxes that I've never been able to finish, that I was stuck on? What will happen? And so this concern came to my head. And when I was able to slowly, with a magnifying glass, work on the manuscript, I had so much now personal experience to put into it of what would she do with these stories? How will she lay them to rest so that they don't haunt her? And that's when the idea came up of the Cemetery of Untold Stories. And then I thought, then I entered into that landscape of the imagination. And Alma decides to go lay them, Alma is my main character, to lay them to rest in her homeland on a little piece of una parcela, a little piece of property she inherited. And she hopes that that's going to put them to rest. And she wants to take them back to the homeland because that's where most of these stories and characters sprung from. So she thinks that will be a fitting rest for them. But oh no, just like the protest saying, I've seen people with placards that say it on marches for DACA and immigrant rights. They tried to bury us. They did not know we were seeds. Her stories could say, she tried to bury us. She did not know we were stories, because of course they come to life when they find listeners in the barrio that surrounds the cemetery, and they tell their secret stories that they withheld from her. So that's kind of where the inspiration came from and how it developed into the novel, The Cemetery of Untold Stories.
That's incredible. And I did read in Publishers Weekly's endnotes that, when you had the crisis with your compromised vision, you had to learn a new way to work. And could you talk a little bit about what was that like for you finding a new way to work, especially with, you at this point, you've been writing stories for, your entire life, and you've been able to master this. You have a huge fan base and loyal readers. I guess, how did you approach that? What was that like for you to, you were forced to approach this novel, under difficult circumstances?
Yeah, well, I feel like Amaris, I didn't even know this was going to be a novel that was going to be put out there. I didn't know. I was so slowed in work, and I had to stop. And when there was strain, I had to, other factors, my body was was um was saying, yeah, no puedo, and so it felt actually a great relief, because I felt like any hour I could get, any few hours I could get, any day that I could get was a gift. And when you've been long in a craft, you get kind of worn out, and you complain about things, and it just sometimes becomes too professional, too much careerism, and that was gone. I mean, that was gone. So I was forced in a way to come back to the reason I had started writing the way I had started writing in the first place, which was out of really sheer joy in this new ability to tell stories and express myself on paper. So it just felt every day that there was a kind of special energy, and almost original energy to it. And I just had to be patient. And, my characters taught me. Filomena, one of my main characters in the new novel, I learned how to listen carefully instead of wanting to get it done, get it published, on to the next book tour, all these things that have become part of the writing life, which I call writing biz and busyness, all of that. It's, the main little seed is that you love this world that can be created in the imagination, and that can enrich and enlarge your way of seeing the world. So I was back to my origin as a writer here at the end of my, you know, life as a writer.
Right.
So,
Okay.
but yeah, it was, and also, of course, it was terrifying. It's, to lose, or to feel like you're losing the one sense that you need in your art.
Mhm.
I said, why couldn't it be my hearing? Why couldn't it have been, you know, but you don't get to cherry pick your life story, unlike the way that you can construct the stories of your characters, unfortunately, or as we say in Dominican, lamentablemente.
Yes.
Yes.
And with Alma, their main protagonist, what I took from, so she, builds this cemetery in this plot of land she inherited from her late father. She buries her unfinished manuscript short stories, all those characters that she couldn't fully realize to publication. But then, like you mentioned, that some of them come alive, begin telling their stories. I found that so fascinating. What followed me though, it made me question as a reader whether you can truly silence a story. What point do you
Mhm.
hope readers draw from this?
Well, honestly, I hope my readers enter this world of the Cemetery of Untold Stories, and that they joy, they connect, they celebrate um, the the multitude of stories, the richness of them, and not just the ones we pick out in the so-called first world and call the bestsellers, the important ones, the classics, the canons, but the grassroots richness that comes from many of our cultures that are oral cultures of the storytelling. And so it's partly that, a kind of in a way, you might think, well, it's kind of magical, so it's mystification of the world. No, it's a demystifying in a way. It's a sense of this is this is something that we do as a critter. We tell stories. We don't weave silk, spin silk like a silkworm. We don't make honey like a honeybee. We tell stories. So it's a celebration of that, but also a recognition of its limitations. You know, how stories, unless you have a multiplicity of them, can become just like the story, the danger of a single story, to quote Adichie, that it's just one story, the official story, the allowable story. And so it's limited, but that it's bigger than all that. And that one of the ways that we can access story is not just by telling them, but by listening to them. Because everybody, I feel, is walking around with a huge library in their heads, a huge compendium of stories. Some people don't feel they have the language, or frankly, the audience, the listener, the reader, because they've been left out of who is going to be privileged in that gated community. So that's why it's untold stories, untold in the sense that we don't hear them because they're not broadcast out there. They're not celebrated. They're sort of put in a barrio of literature, and I wanted to explode that idea in the Cemetery of Untold Stories.
I think you broke that open, definitely. And let's talk about the cemetery, because in the novel, the cemetery is a character in itself. It has its sculptures, it's decorated. There's a little box at the entrance where locals wanting to enter need to tell a story for access. You even place Filomena as, to take care of the whole thing. What was it like for you to build this cemetery on the page?
Oh, it was fun because I really I really got to explore what story is all about. And one of the things that happened is once I set the cemetery in this barrio near the town dump, and there is a cemetery that I visited in the Dominican Republic with my primo, who took me around, and there were people doing ceremonias al barón del cementerio. And so I got a sense of there's a whole culture and richness there. And you stop by any grave and look at a sculpture, and you try to imagine, what was that life? And some are famous graves, and you try to think of the story that the person that's buried there. So all of that history that you mentioned, Dominican history, Dominican culture and lore, and Santeria, all of that came to play, because that's what surrounds the cemetery and invades the cemetery. They make the cemetery their own. And that was what was wonderful. And exploring what the role in that, barrio, that vecindario that surrounds the cementerio de cuentos nunca contados, what it's like and how they understand, this.
Definitely. You did such a beautiful job. Normally, when I pass by a cemetery, I'm like, I it kind of like withdraw within myself. But you made me want to dive into this cemetery. It's like I want to get to know these characters, and I want to. Could I tell a compelling enough story to be let in? I mean, just the whole concept was fascinating. Let's talk about Filomena. So she's hired by Alma. She's a local woman. She's hired as a groundskeeper to take care of the cemetery. And then in the novel, you describe her as una alma de Dios. And she's been dealt a difficult card in life, readers will find, and she becomes a sympathetic ear to the characters in the cemetery. For a few reasons, her character reminded me vaguely of, because I grew up going to the Dominican Republic every summer, and she really reminded me of the girls and the women who are frequently hired for housework, cooking
Oh,
or
yeah.
cleaning. Oh, la muchacha para limpiar, la muchacha que limpia que lava la ropa, So I was curious, what or who inspired this character?
Oh, I've known so many Filomenas. I've known so many Filomenas, so many Perlas, from my own childhood, as you say, people that were hired to clean. And it was actually the people we spent the most time with. Papi was off working, mommy was involved with the tias and this, that, and the other. And the niñeras, la cocinera, la que venía a lavar la ropa, el jardinero, whoever came, they kind of, that's who you hung out with. Their stories were what you listened to, stories of El Cuco, of La Ciguapa, all of these things, came that they were the first muses. They were my first muses. And, they were the people that if you fell down, picked you up and say, and gave you a little healing rhyme. Sana, sana, culito de rana, si no te sana hoy, te sana mañana. So
Yes.
they were like, they were the culture. And so all of those characters and their stories from childhood. And when I went off to an MFA program and I was being taught the classics and the canons, back then we didn't read multicultural literature, we didn't read many women writers, we read maybe one or two representative African American writers, and I always thought, oh, where is my inspiration? And then I thought, my inspiration came from mostly women of my childhood, many of whom couldn't read or write. But everything I was learning in graduate school about story construction, humor, pacing, dialogue, I had learned in mi niñez from these women who didn't even have, hadn't even finished primaria. And so I realized these were really my first muses,
That's incredible. I also had every summer, usually there was someone in my tia's house or my tio's house. And I remember one woman was named Reina, and I have photos with her. And I'm like, todo con parona in my photo, like this. You know how Dominican women love taking pictures holding touching trees and plants? And she's there in the background, and I'm there, posing. I think I was like 6 or 7.
Oh, I'd love to get a picture. He's really.
I'll try to find it
on my tour.
Thank you. I'll try to find it. So,
Oh.
as it's described in the back jacket of the book, the characters, what I took from is the characters in your novel, they resist the control of their creator, essentially Alma. They talk to each other even. I'm wondering, is this something that you have felt in your own writing life, that your characters and stories can sometimes become unwieldy?
Oh, absolutely. And they know more about the story than I do. That's something that's very humbling. If you think about it as a writer, you think that you're the one in control, and you are. You have control of the craft because you're the one that, knows how to use those sentences and metaphors and all the things that you learn in school. But you're telling their story, and they're really the ones that know that story. And they're the ones that know the secrets. If they're a character that is keeping a secret, you don't know it as a writer because it's a secret, but they're the ones who know it. So that's why, you can learn something from someone like Filomena to really listen. And that kind of empathic, compassionate listening, where you're listening because in a sense, your life depends on connecting with a story to feel less alone and to feel like you understand it a little better. I mean, that is for me the best reader of my work, someone that you feel needs to hear this story. It's not just, oh, entertainment, oh, something to post about. No, it's someone who's reading this book and it is like string in their labyrinth. And to read with that kind of a connection to a story makes the story come alive. Because remember, I only do half the work. I get the story down. Then I depend on my readers to pick it up and give it life in their imagination. And so that second part is critical. So when you get a reader that connects the way Filomena connects with listening to these character stories, she finds, renewed life, a bigger life, because now it's connected to a bigger story than just her secret own story. So I think that kind of a reader and that kind of a relationship is something that is so important in the reading process and the people that are going to pick up my novel or any novel.
Definitely. And can we talk about Bienvenida Inocencia, Ricardo de Trujillo? Wow, that's a mouthful. The second wife of the late Dominican dictator, Rafael Trujillo. Many Dominicans know who Trujillo was, just about every Dominican, but much less is known about Bienvenida as a historical figure. And as a reader, I was fascinated by your choice to breathe life and fullness into who Bienvenida was, and how she could possibly have fallen in love with, him. What inspired you to fictionalize her story for your novel?
Well, she is a curious character. I mean, she was Trujillo's second wife, and then when he married a woman that was very much like him, Doña Maria, who basically had Bienvenida's name taken down from everything and pulled out of any description of first ladies, a history of first ladies. She did not want Bienvenida anywhere to be known. And so Bienvenida virtually was erased. She was exiled from her country. She was, her marriage was eventually annulled by the Pope, and so she was really, she. You have to put in perspective. She was not like a dissident that was tortured and their family eliminated, but she was one of the casualties of the dictatorship. She was an emotional and romantic casualty, and part of the thing that interested me about her is that when I learned about her, I thought, wow, why didn't we ever know about her? Who was this person? And with a name like, truly, her name was Bienvenida Inocencia. I thought, boy, to marry the, the devil himself, Trujillo. And as I researched her, so many people came forward and said she was such a good woman. She tried to soften his sharp edges. Dissidents would go to her and she would help them escape. While she was first lady, she was in some ways una masa de pan, obedient and subservient to mi jefe. And that the story she told herself is that he was a great man, and sometimes he had to be like a really tough parent because we were such an unruly people. So she used story to blind herself. And that's part of the novel too, because stories are powerful and you can use them for good or for ill. So I wondered a lot about who she was and how could a good woman fall in love with this guy. And then how over the years, because she continued in relationship with him, how over the years she understood who he was and who she was. What kind of awareness did she have, as she realized who and what, because she suffered at his hands. And she, as I said, was one of his casualties. And if you think of it, the Dominican people, many of them that were not dissidents, did not stand up to Trujillo, just wanted to be good people, live a good life, but let this monster take over their country, their psyches, their freedoms for 31 years. How does that happen to quote unquote good people? So, it's not so rare as we'd like to think.
It still happens in the present day. And your novel at its heart, since as we've already spoken about, is about storytelling. And for decades now, you've been bringing stories forth to readers. You've also taught writing. And so while working on the Cemetery of Untold Stories, did you learn anything new about storytelling itself? Was there, yeah, I was curious about that. I mean, so much already about storytelling. I was curious.
Oh, no, Amaris. That's what I meant too about going back to the origin of why I got started writing when I didn't think I would even, I thought I won't even finish this novel. And if I do, it might very well be my last novel. But then I discovered the sheer joy of storytelling. And part of it is each time there has to be a radical innocence. when you start a book. Sure, you've learned a ton of things from the last book and the last book and the last book. And when you're as old as me and as long in the craft, there's been a lot of, and the book before and the book before. But that's the thing. You have to recover that innocence, what the Zen masters call beginner's mind, because that new book you're writing is its own critter. You have to learn what that book wants to be, because otherwise you're just going with a cookie cutter that worked last time and imposing it on your material. And I don't get any enjoyment out of not learning when I'm writing a book. If I'm not surprised, my reader won't be surprised. I'm constantly discovering. And sometimes I take a wrong turn because I want to impose my will on the story, and it starts to go flat, and I have to go back and listen harder again. So yeah, I mean, in some ways, a celebration of storytelling, celebration of a life lived with the privilege of practicing something that I think is my calling, what I was put on this earth to do, but also an understanding that that I'm learning, I'm constantly learning, and that's what keeps me interested. If I already knew everything that was going to go in a book, I'd get bored. And I think my reader would too. So it has to have the juice of discovery and learning. So I learned a lot. And also, sort of return with a new appreciation of the grassroots of storytelling and our oral cultures and our so-called demeaningly third world, or as somebody recently said, we're not a minority, we're the world majority. The cultures of world majorities and how often they've been, dismissed as primitive or undeveloped or unsophisticated. So yeah, it's discovering that and celebrating it.
Definitely. And I want to say that you have many longtime readers of your work, obviously, who view each book that you write as a gift. And so, as one of them, I was happy to hear. I think you said in Publishers Weekly, that this is not your last book, or so you hope. And my last question is, you dedicate this book to Anon, to people who are unknown to you, who have given you help, love, and support throughout your life. And it made me think about you and your legacy and the legacy that you've built in this global world of literature. And I'm sure you've met only a portion of your readers at this point, because you do book tours, but there's so many more readers who haven't had the chance to, meet you or, have your book signed, So why was it important for you to dedicate this book to Anon?
Well, when Anon represents so many invisible people, that some also invisible to me, but invisible in the sense that down the ages, women could not publish or be out in public. And whenever something of theirs got into the mainstream, it was by anonymous. So who were those anonymous? All those mothers and abuelitas and storytellers of the past, all the sisters of Shakespeare or daughters of Milton, all those Anons. So I'm thinking about them, and I'm thinking of all the many people. I mean, from La Tia that sewed your dress when you did your first recitation in school, and sort of gave you your robes to wear in public, everybody that contributed, the teacher who stayed a little extra time so that you would understand the difference between a noun and a verb, or learn your English when you came to Nueva York, all those people, and there's a wonderful Native American story that I just love. It's about a woman that wants to touch the stars, and all her life she reaches and reaches and reaches, and she can't yet reach the stars. And then when she's an old woman, she finally touches the star, and Father Sky looks down and says, "How did you get to be so tall?" And she said, I'm standing on a lot of shoulders. And that's the way I feel. And those are Anons all the way down, Anons all the way down. And the Anons that help you publish a book, your editor, your agent, your publicist, all those people that, you know, do all the magic and then they disappear. And you get all the attention, you know.
Yes. But obviously it's like everyone leaves a little tiny mark or imprint on you throughout your
Yeah,
life. So
absolutely.
I just thought that was beautiful that you dedicated that, and I wanted to ask you about that. But Julia, those are all my questions. I want to thank you so much
I
for just taking the time to speak with me.
Oh,
And
it's been wonderful. You know,
thank-
I can't turn down, uh, well, Dominican Writers Association or one of the two Angies that now are part of my stars. You know, Angie Cruz and Angie, ¿cómo se?
Abreu.
Abreu, Angel Abreu, as well. And all of us, you know, you mentioned that behind you are two shelves of Dominican writers, and we're going
Yes.
to fill that up. Girl, we're going to have that filled up in a few more years because there's so many wonderful young, middle-aged, old. Let's not forget Rina Espaillat in her 90s, the poet,
Mhm.
wonderful writer. So we're a force to be reckoned with. So thank you, Amaris, for your
Thank
time.
you.
And don't forget your promesa. You're going
Yes.
to find that picture, maybe.
I will definitely look for it. I'm gonna stop the recording now. Is that okay?
Okay, sure.